The screen flickered to life, its cold glow illuminating my face in the dim room. I laughed softly, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. A dating site. At 61, with a marriage of nearly 4 decades behind me, the idea seemed ridiculous. Yet, here I was, Olivia Hayes, clicking through strangers' profiles and exchanging witty banter with men whose compliments made me blush. It wasn't Adam's fault, really. His health had declined over the years, the vibrancy in his laughter dulled by endless appointments and prescriptions. Our love hadn't faded, it had settled like an old photograph losing its sharpness. The intimacy we once shared had been absent for 4 years now, replaced by a companionship that felt, at times, like an arrangement. He was still my partner, my confidant. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the thrill of feeling desired. My friend Linda had introduced me to the site. "Just try it," she'd said over lunch, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "It's not about meeting anyone. It's about remembering what it feels like to be seen." First, I thought it would be a lark, an idle distraction. But soon, I found myself looking forward to the messages that pinged through the site. Strangers telling me how radiant I looked, how youthful. It was intoxicating, even if their words were ephemeral. One evening, as I scrolled through my inbox, a new message appeared. The profile photo showed a man in his 30s. His name listed as James. His opening line made me laugh out loud, a playful, disarming wit that cut through the sea of clichés. Intrigued, I responded. Over the next few days, James and I exchanged messages. He seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts, my life. He asked about my yoga practice, my favorite books, even my guilty pleasure of binge-watching mystery dramas. There was something familiar in the way he teased and encouraged me, a warmth that felt both comforting and thrilling. Meanwhile, my son Luke had been unusually attentive at home. "You're glowing, Mom," he said one morning as we sipped coffee together. "What's your secret?" I laughed, brushing off his comment. "Just taking better care of myself," I said. It wasn't entirely untrue. Inspired by my newfound confidence, I'd started going to the salon more often, picking up old hobbies. The effect was noticeable. What I didn't know was that Luke had seen my profile. He'd recognized me instantly despite the youthful photos I'd carefully chosen. His initial shock had given way to a peculiar curiosity. Who was this woman his mother had become? And who was James? Out of both mischief and a strange sense of protectiveness, Luke created a profile of his own. He crafted a persona, James, and began to write to me. First, it was a game. He wanted to see how far I would take this online flirtation, to understand the allure of the world I'd stumbled into. But as our conversations deepened, something shifted. He found himself drawn to the version of me that existed in those messages, a vibrant, witty woman he hadn't fully known. It was both unsettling and fascinating to him. For my part, I was enamored with this stranger. James seemed to understand me in ways I hadn't felt understood in years. His words were a mirror, reflecting back a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. Then came the moment I'll never forget. "Let's meet," James wrote one evening. My heart raced at the suggestion. It was absurd, of course. I was married. But the idea of seeing him face to face, of bridging the gap between fantasy and reality, was tantalizing. I hesitated for days, torn between my growing connection to James and the reality of my life with Adam. But eventually I agreed. Coffee shop downtown, somewhere discreet. The day of the meeting, I was a bundle of nerves. I arrived early, scanning the room for a man I'd never truly seen. And then, as the door swung open, my breath caught in my throat. It was Luke. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. My son Luke stood in the doorway of the coffee shop, his eyes locking onto mine. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between surprise and hesitation. I could feel my face flush with a heat that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "Luke." My voice came out in a whisper, barely audible over the cafe's hum. He smiled, that familiar half-grin I'd known his entire life, and walked toward me. My heart pounded, each step of his closing the distance between the surreal and the painfully real. As he sat down across from me, setting a cup of coffee on the table, I noticed the tension in his jaw. "What are you doing here?" I finally managed, though the words caught in my throat. A part of me was already beginning to piece the puzzle together, but I wasn't ready to face the picture it painted. He hesitated, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his voice soft but pointed. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. The absurdity of the situation hit me like a tidal wave. The James I'd been baring my soul to, the man whose words had made me feel seen and desired, was my son. I wanted to bolt out of the coffee shop, to escape the suffocating weight of my own decisions. But I couldn't move. I started, my voice faltering. How did you know? Luke sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I saw your profile. A couple of weeks ago. He looked away for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy or anything. His gaze met mine again, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. I was curious. And I couldn't believe it was you. Shame burned in my chest, spreading like wildfire. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, I said quickly, my words tumbling out. It was just, started as a joke. Something Linda suggested. I didn't think. Mom, stop. Luke's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. I'm not judging you. I mean, at first, yeah, I was shocked. But then I started thinking about why you'd be on a site like that. And I guess, I understood. I blinked, startled by his candor. You understood. He nodded, his expression softening. Dad's been sick for years. You've been taking care of him, of everything, without ever thinking about yourself. I've seen it. I've seen how much you've been holding back. His voice lowered. But I didn't expect to find you like this. Alive, vibrant. Talking to you as James was like meeting a completely different version of you. My breath caught in my throat. The way he said it, with both admiration and something I couldn't quite place, sent a shiver through me. You knew it was me, and you kept talking to me? I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. Luke leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him. At first it was just to figure out what you were doing. But then, I don't know. The things you said, the way you opened up, it didn't feel like I was talking to my mom. It felt like I was talking to someone I wanted to know better. My stomach twisted, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy blanket. I looked down at my hands, twisting the edge of a napkin. The vulnerability in his tone unnerved me, as did the truth behind his words. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, I said quietly. I wanted to feel something again. To remember what it was like to be noticed. Desired. Luke didn't reply immediately. When I finally looked up, his gaze was fixed on me, his expression unreadable. I noticed, he said after a long pause. Even before I saw the profile, I noticed how you were changing. You looked happier, stronger. I just didn't realize why. The silence between us stretched, heavy and charged. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to demand why he'd done this, why he'd led me into such a tangled web. But another part of me, a deeper, darker part, wasn't angry at all. It was curious, drawn to the connection we'd built, even under false pretenses. Finally, Luke broke the silence. I never meant to hurt you, Mom. I wanted to understand you better. And now I do. I shook my head, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Luke, it's not okay. Whatever this is, it can't happen. I know, he said, his voice firm. But then he hesitated, leaning forward again. But you can't pretend it didn't. You can't tell me you didn't feel something too. My breath caught. The truth was I had felt something. A spark, a connection, an understanding I hadn't felt in years. But acknowledging it, saying it out loud, was a step I wasn't ready to take. This has to stop, I said, forcing my voice to steady. I need time to think, to figure out what this all means. Luke nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. Take all the time you need, he said softly. But just don't shut me out. Please. I nodded, unable to form words. As he stood and walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange mix of relief and longing. This was my son, and yet, the lines between who we were and what we had become felt irreparably blurred. At home, life resumed its ordinary rhythm, as though nothing had happened. Luke and I fell into our usual roles, mother and son discussing groceries, his work, the latest shows we'd started watching. We had an unspoken agreement to leave the tension of the coffee shop behind, to bury it beneath layers of mundane conversation. But beneath the surface, something simmered. By day we were perfectly ordinary. But at night the walls we built crumbled. Our chats began innocently enough, Luke reaching out as James, though it was no secret who he was. His messages carried the same wit and charm that had drawn me to him in the first place. He would ask how I was feeling, teasing me when I gave short answers. "You're better at this than you think," he wrote once, followed by a winking emoji. "Am I?" I replied, the faintest smile tugging at my lips. "You are Olivia." He called me Olivia in every message, and it did something to me. It stripped away my role as his mother, peeling back the layers of duty and familiarity. When I saw my name on the screen, it felt like an invitation to step into someone else's skin, to be the vibrant, confident woman I hadn't been in years. At first, I hesitated to write back freely. The weight of who we were in the real world loomed over every word I typed. But Luke James kept urging me on. "Don't hold back," he wrote one evening. "This space is just for us. No judgments, no expectations. Just say what you feel." It was intoxicating, that freedom. To speak without constraints, to be honest in ways I couldn't be during the daylight hours. I found myself telling him things I hadn't admitted to anyone, not even myself. How I felt invisible sometimes, even in my own home. How I missed the touch of intimacy, the thrill of being wanted. Luke listened, his responses thoughtful and sincere. He told me how he admired my strength, my grace. "You don't even realize how incredible you are, do you?" he wrote one night. I stared at the screen, his words glowing softly in the darkened room. "You're just saying that," I replied, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I'm not," he answered. "I mean every word. You deserve to feel alive, Olivia. You deserve to feel everything." His messages grew bolder, his compliments more direct. He noticed things about me that no one else had, like the way I always twisted my hair when I was deep in thought or how my laugh softened when I was truly happy. I found myself looking forward to his messages more and more, staying up late to continue our conversations. They were a lifeline, a thread connecting me to a version of myself I thought I'd lost. But it wasn't just the words. There was a charge between us, a tension that hummed louder with every message. Our conversations became heated, the lines between playful teasing and something deeper blurring. He asked me what I was wearing one night, his tone light-hearted but laced with something more. I told him about my favorite silk robe, the one I wore when I wanted to feel elegant. "Beautiful," he wrote. "I can picture it. You must look stunning." I felt my cheeks flush, my pulse quickening. His words had a power over me I couldn't deny. One night, as the clock ticked past midnight, I was lying in bed, scrolling through our messages. My phone buzzed with a new one. "Can I come over?" My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the words, my mind racing. Adam was asleep in the next room, his snoring faint but steady. We hadn't shared a bed in years, a separation born of practicality more than anything else. My bedroom felt like its own world, separate from the rest of the house. "Now," I typed back, my fingers trembling. "Now," Luke replied. "Just for a minute. I need to see you." I hesitated, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Every instinct told me to say no, to stop this before it spiraled out of control. But instead I found myself typing, "Okay. The back door is unlocked." Minutes later, I heard the faint creak of the door and the soft shuffle of footsteps. My heart pounded as I hurried to lock my bedroom door, ensuring we wouldn't be interrupted. When the door opened, Luke stood there, his expression a mix of nervousness and determination. "Olivia," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. He closed the door behind him, and in an instant I was in his arms. The hug was fierce, his embrace strong and grounding. I pressed my face into his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. For a moment, the world outside my bedroom didn't exist. There was only the warmth of his arms around me, the steady thrum of his heartbeat against mine. We stood there in silence, holding each other as though letting go would shatter us both. His hand slid gently up and down my back, a soothing motion that sent shivers through me. I felt safe, cherished, and for the first time in years, truly alive. "I shouldn't have come," Luke murmured, his voice heavy with emotion. But I couldn't stay away. I pulled back slightly, just enough to look into his eyes. "You're here now," I said, my voice trembling. "That's all that matters." His hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin with a tenderness that made my heart ache. "You're so beautiful," he whispered. "Luke," I started, but he shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "Just for tonight, let me hold you. Please." I nodded, unable to form words. We stayed like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the weight of the world pressing against the locked door. The boundaries we'd crossed seemed both dangerous and inevitable, and in that moment I didn't care. As the days passed, our connection deepened in ways that felt both transformative and grounding. Luke and I were closer than ever, our bond fueled by an unspoken understanding that neither of us had anticipated. The lines of communication between us remained open, and our time together became a refuge from the world outside. In his presence, I felt a resurgence of something I thought I'd lost, a vitality, a sense of being truly alive. For too long, I had carried the weight of others' expectations, quietly putting my own needs aside. But Luke reminded me that I was still a living, breathing woman with thoughts, desires, and dreams. He listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel seen. And I wasn't the only one who changed. Luke seemed lighter, more confident. He told me how much he appreciated the honesty we shared, how our conversations helped him see himself more clearly. "You've given me so much," he said one evening as we sat on the porch, the cool breeze carrying his words. "You've made me feel like I can handle anything." His words mirrored my own thoughts. In Luke's company, I rediscovered parts of myself I had forgotten, the parts that found joy in spontaneity, in laughter, in the quiet thrill of being understood. I didn't think about ending the closeness we'd found. It felt too essential, too affirming. For the first time in years, I felt truly whole. We continued to keep our connection private, not out of shame but out of a desire to protect what we had built. It wasn't something that fit into the neat confines of societal roles or expectations, but it was ours. We respected the boundaries of the world around us while carving out a space where we could simply be ourselves. Even in our secrecy, there was a sense of freedom. Luke and I found moments to be together. Conversations in the kitchen, shared walks in the early morning light, or quiet evenings spent watching the stars. These were the moments that defined us, that reminded us why our bond mattered. One night, as we sat in the living room, a comfortable silence settled between us. The glow of the fireplace cast warm shadows on the walls, and I found myself reflecting on how far we had come. "Do you ever think about what this all means?" I asked softly, my voice carrying the weight of my thoughts. Luke glanced at me, his expression thoughtful. "I think it means we've found something rare," he said. "Something that makes us better." His answer was simple, yet it held a truth I couldn't deny. What we shared wasn't perfect, but it was meaningful. It was a reminder that connection, real, honest connection, could transcend the limitations we placed on ourselves. As the months went on, Luke and I supported each other in every way we could. I encouraged him to take risks in his career, to pursue opportunities he once might have overlooked. He cheered me on as I explored new hobbies and reconnected with old friends. Together we pushed each other to grow, to reach for a better version of ourselves. Our bond also gave me the courage to address the unspoken distance in my marriage to Adam. I began having honest conversations with him about the ways we had drifted apart, about the needs we had neglected. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Slowly, we found new ways to reconnect and support one another, building a partnership that honored the years we had shared. For Luke, our connection became a source of inspiration. He found clarity in our talks, and with that clarity came a renewed sense of purpose. Watching him thrive was a joy I couldn't put into words, a reminder that our bond had given him the strength to embrace his potential. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Luke turned to me with a soft smile. "You've changed my life, Olivia," he said. "You've taught me so much about love and resilience." I reached for his hand, a quiet sense of gratitude welling up inside me. "And you've reminded me that it's never too late to find yourself again." The air around us was calm, the world bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, our bond would remain a source of strength. It wasn't about defying expectations or breaking rules. It was about the connection we'd found and the way it had helped us both grow. As time passed, the intensity of those early days softened into something steady and enduring. Luke and I remained close, our relationship evolving into a deep and abiding friendship. It wasn't always easy, but it was real, a testament to the power of connection and the capacity for change. In the end, we both emerged stronger, more assured of who we were and what we wanted from life. And though the path we had walked was unconventional, it had led us to a place of clarity and peace. For that, I was endlessly grateful.